When you sign a lease agreement, you're entering into a legal contract that outlines the rights and responsibilities of both the landlord and the tenant. But not every clause in a lease is automatically legal or enforceable. Some clauses, even if written and signed, may violate local, state, or federal laws. In this video, we'll explore what makes a lease clause illegal, why it matters, and how you can protect yourself as a renter or landlord. Let's start by understanding the basics of lease agreements and the importance of knowing your rights. An illegal lease clause is any provision in a rental agreement that contradicts established laws or regulations. These clauses might seem binding at first glance, but courts will not enforce them if challenged. For example, a lease cannot waive your right to a habitable living space or allow a landlord to enter your home without proper notice. Understanding what makes a clause illegal is crucial for both tenants and landlords to avoid disputes and potential legal trouble. Some lease clauses are commonly found, but are actually illegal. For instance, a clause that says the tenant cannot sue the landlord under any circumstances is not enforceable. Other examples include clauses that require tenants to pay for all repairs, even those that are the landlord's responsibility, or clauses that waive the landlord's duty to maintain a safe and habitable property. Recognizing these examples can help you spot red flags in your own lease. You might wonder why illegal clauses appear in leases at all. Sometimes, landlords are unaware of the law or use outdated lease templates. In other cases, they may intentionally include such clauses, hoping tenants won't notice or challenge them. This highlights the importance of reading your lease carefully and understanding your rights before signing. Being informed is your first line of defense against unfair or unlawful terms. Federal laws set minimum standards for tenant protection, regardless of what a lease says. For example, the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, or disability. Any lease clause that attempts to bypass these protections is illegal. Understanding federal protections helps you recognize when a lease is overstepping its bounds. In addition to federal laws, each state and even some cities have their own rules about what can and cannot be included in a lease. For example, some states limit the amount of security deposit a landlord can charge or require specific notice periods before entering a rental unit. Always check your local laws, as they may offer even greater protections than federal law. One of the most fundamental tenant rights is the right to a habitable home. This means the property must be safe, clean, and fit to live in. Any lease clause that tries to waive this right is illegal. Landlords are required by law to maintain basic living standards, such as working, plumbing, heating, and secure doors and windows. Many states set limits on how much a landlord can charge for a security deposit. If a lease includes a clause that requires a higher deposit than the law allows, that clause is illegal. Additionally, some states require landlords to return deposits within a certain time frame after the tenant moves out. These rules protect tenants from unfair financial burdens. A lease cannot give a landlord unlimited access to your home. Most states require landlords to provide advance notice, usually 24 to 48 hours, before entering a rental unit, except in emergencies. Any clause that allows entry without notice or at unreasonable times is illegal and violates your right to privacy. Any lease clause that discriminates against tenants based on race, religion, gender, family status, or disability is strictly illegal. These types of clauses violate both federal and state fair housing laws. If you see any language in a lease that singles out protected groups, know that it cannot be enforced and should be reported. Some leases attempt to make tenants waive their legal rights, such as the right to sue the landlord or the right to a jury trial. These clauses are generally unenforceable. The law protects tenants from being forced to give up fundamental rights, regardless of what the lease says. While landlords can charge late fees for overdue rent, these fees must be reasonable and comply with state law. A clause that imposes excessive or punitive late fees is illegal. Most states set a maximum percentage or dollar amount that can be charged. Always check your local regulations to ensure late fees are fair. Some leases try to make tenants responsible for all repairs, even those that are the landlord's duty by law. For example, landlords must fix structural issues, plumbing, and heating. A clause that shifts these responsibilities to the tenant is illegal and cannot be enforced. A lease cannot allow a landlord to evict a tenant without following the proper legal process. Any clause that says a landlord can evict you without notice or for reasons not allowed by law is illegal. Tenants are entitled to due process, including notice and a court hearing before eviction. Some leases include penalties if a tenant takes legal action against the landlord, such as suing for repairs or reporting code violations. These clauses are illegal. Tenants have the right to seek legal remedies without fear of retaliation or extra charges. While landlords can set reasonable rules about subletting, a clause that completely bans subletting in all circumstances may be illegal in some jurisdictions. Some states require landlords to have a valid reason to deny a sublet request. Always check your local laws regarding subletting rights. Some leases try to ban all pets, but federal law requires landlords to make reasonable accommodations for service animals and emotional support animals. Any clause that prohibits these animals is illegal, regardless of a general pet ban. Some leases include clauses that allow landlords to raise the rent at any time, for any reason. In many places, this is illegal. Rent increases must comply with state or local rent control laws, and proper notice must be given. Always check your area's rules before agreeing to such terms. A lease cannot require tenants to pay for utilities that are legally the landlord's responsibility, such as water or heat, in some jurisdictions. If a clause shifts these costs to the tenant against the law, it is unenforceable. Always clarify who is responsible for which utilities before signing. While landlords can set reasonable limits on guests, a lease cannot ban all visitors or set overly restrictive rules. For example, a clause that says no overnight guests ever is likely illegal. Reasonable guest policies must respect tenants' rights to have friends and family visit. A lease cannot allow a landlord to lock out a tenant without a court order. Any clause that gives the landlord the right to change the locks or remove the tenant's belongings without due process is illegal. Tenants must be given proper notice and a chance to respond in court. Some leases include fees that are not allowed by law, such as administrative fees, move-in fees, or excessive application fees. If a fee is not permitted by state or local law, it is illegal and cannot be enforced. Always ask for a breakdown of all charges before signing a lease. A lease cannot allow a landlord to terminate the agreement for reasons not permitted by law, such as retaliation for complaints or arbitrary decisions. Any clause that gives the landlord unchecked power to end the lease is illegal. Tenants have the right to stability and fair treatment. Some leases try to restrict how tenants can pay rent, such as requiring only cash payments or banning checks. In many places, tenants have the right to choose from several payment methods. Clauses that limit payment options beyond what the law allows are illegal. Some leases require tenants to buy renter's insurance, but in some states, this is not allowed. If a lease mandates insurance in violation of state law, that clause is unenforceable. Always check your local regulations before agreeing to insurance requirements. A lease cannot prohibit tenants from installing legal security devices, such as deadbolts or window locks, especially if state law allows it. Any clause that bans reasonable security measures is illegal. Tenants have the right to feel safe in their homes. Some leases try to ban tenants from joining or forming renters associations. Such clauses are illegal, as tenants have the right to organize and advocate for their interests. Any attempt to restrict this right is unenforceable. A lease cannot prevent tenants from withholding rent when the landlord fails to make necessary repairs, if state law allows it. Any clause that bans rent withholding in these situations is illegal. Tenants must follow proper procedures, but their rights cannot be waived. Some leases try to shorten or eliminate the notice period required by law for things like eviction or rent increases. Any clause that provides less notice than the law requires is illegal. Tenants are entitled to proper notice before major changes. A lease cannot deny tenants the right to receive a rent receipt, especially if state law requires landlords to provide one. Any clause that says receipts are not available is illegal. Rent receipts are important for record keeping and resolving disputes. Some leases try to limit tenants' rights to renew or extend their lease, even when the law provides protections. Any clause that unfairly restricts renewal options or imposes illegal conditions is unenforceable. Tenants should know their rights regarding lease extensions. A fixed-term lease usually locks in the rent amount for the duration of the lease. Any clause that allows the landlord to increase rent during the lease term without legal justification is illegal. Rent can only be raised according to the terms allowed by law. A lease cannot allow the landlord to enter the property at any time for any reason. State laws require notice and limit entry to certain situations. Any clause that gives the landlord unlimited access is illegal and violates tenant privacy. A lease cannot allow the landlord to deduct from the security deposit for normal wear and tear. Only damages beyond normal use can be deducted. Any clause that expands deduction rights beyond the law is illegal. Some leases try to ban lease assignment entirely, but in some states, tenants have the right to assign their lease under certain conditions. Any clause that completely prohibits assignment, contrary to state law, is illegal. A lease cannot allow the landlord to seize or dispose of a tenant's personal property without following legal procedures. Any clause that gives the landlord this power is illegal. Tenants are protected by law from unlawful property seizure. Some leases try to prevent tenants from making necessary repairs and deducting the cost from rent, even when state law allows it. Any clause that bans this right is illegal. Tenants must follow proper procedures, but their rights cannot be waived. A lease cannot allow the landlord to change the terms of the agreement at will without tenant consent. Any clause that gives the landlord unilateral power to modify the lease is illegal. Both parties must agree to changes in writing. A lease cannot waive a tenant's right to quiet enjoyment of the property. This means tenants have the right to live without unreasonable disturbances. Any clause that tries to limit this right is illegal and unenforceable. A lease cannot allow a landlord to retaliate against a tenant for exercising their legal rights, such as reporting code violations or joining a tenants association. Any clause that permits retaliation is illegal and void. A lease cannot waive a tenant's right to privacy. Landlords must respect tenants' personal space and follow legal entry procedures. Any clause that allows for surveillance or unannounced visits is illegal. A lease cannot prevent tenants from requesting necessary repairs or reporting unsafe conditions. Any clause that discourages or bans repair requests is illegal. Tenants have the right to a safe and well-maintained home. To protect yourself, always read your lease carefully and look for any clauses that seem unfair or overly restrictive. Compare the lease terms to your local tenant laws. If you're unsure, consult a legal expert or tenant advocacy group. Knowing what to look for is the first step in avoiding illegal lease clauses. If you discover an illegal clause in your lease, don't panic. Start by discussing the issue with your landlord. Many times, landlords are willing to remove or revise the clause once it's brought to their attention. If the landlord refuses, you may need to seek help from a local housing authority or legal professional. Remember, illegal clauses are not enforceable, even if you sign the lease. Understanding illegal lease clauses is essential for protecting your rights as a tenant. Always read your lease carefully, know your local laws, and don't hesitate to ask questions or seek help if something doesn't seem right. Remember, the law is on your side when it comes to illegal lease clauses. Stay informed, stay empowered, and make sure your rental experience is fair and legal.